Did you know that one of the most famous detective movies ever made had a mystery that even the filmmakers couldn't solve? When The Big Sleep came out in 1946, audiences fell in love with it instantly. But here's the strange part. Nobody could explain one important part of the story. Not the writer, not the director, not even the actors. They just left it hanging in the air like smoke. Today, we're going to uncover 20 wild, weird, and wonderful facts about this classic film that changed movie history forever. These are secrets that have been hiding in Hollywood for nearly 80 years, just waiting for someone curious enough to find them. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about The Big Sleep. Fact number 20. The mystery that nobody could explain. The most unusual thing about The Big Sleep might be the plot itself. There's a character named Sean Regan who disappears early in the movie. Throughout the entire film, everyone talks about finding him. Detective tries to solve this mystery. Characters argue about where he went. But here's the wild part. The movie ends and nobody ever explains what actually happened to Sean Regan. Nobody. One person in the entire film says where he went or what he did. When the writers and directors were asked about this after the movie came out, they had to admit something embarrassing. They didn't actually know either. The original book by Raymond Chandler had the answer, but somewhere along the way, the answer got lost between the pages and the film. Director Howard Hawks and screenwriter William Faulkner sat down to discuss it, and they couldn't figure it out themselves. One of them said, "Let's just leave it mysterious." Nobody realized until years later that this wasn't on purpose. It was just an honest mistake that became one of Hollywood's greatest accidents. What looked like a clever mystery was actually a forgotten answer. Fact number 19. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall's real chemistry changed everything. When Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall first met on the set of The Big Sleep, something magical happened that had never happened before in Hollywood. Bacall was only 19 years old. Bogart was already a big star, much older, and married to someone else. The moment they looked at each other during filming, something electric filled the air. You could see it in every single scene. They didn't have to act, they just had to stand next to each other, and the whole screen would light up. The director, Howard Hawks, noticed this immediately. Started writing new scenes just to film them together. He added more moments where they would look into each other's eyes. He created more dialogue where they would tease each other with words. Test audiences watched these scenes and forgot to breathe. People were so caught up in watching Bogart and Bacall together that they didn't even care about the detective story anymore. It started as a normal movie, suddenly became a love story. Years later, Bogart and Bacall fell in love for real, got married, and stayed together for the rest of their lives. It all began in this moment, on this set in 1946. Real romance was born from a fake one. That wasn't just acting, it was real magic. Fact number 18. They reshot scenes after test audiences complied. Here's something that surprised the filmmakers. When they showed The Big Sleep to test audiences for the first time, people loved Bogart and Bacall so much that they wanted more of them. They wanted to see the characters together constantly. They wanted more flirting, more looks, more clever conversations. So Howard Hawks did something unusual. He took the film back to the studio and reshot entire scenes. He added new moments between the two main characters that weren't even in the original story. He created extra dialogue that was never written in the script. Filmed brand new scenes from scratch just because audiences wanted to see these two people on screen together. This was very expensive and took extra time, but Hawks didn't care. He understood something important. He realized that sometimes what the audience feels in their hearts matters more than the story on the page. The strange thing is that some of these new scenes made the plot even more confusing. Detective mystery became harder to follow. Nobody minded, because they were too busy watching Bogart and Bacall. This was a big moment in film history. It showed directors that chemistry between actors could be more important than perfect storytelling. What looked planned was actually made up as they went along. Fact number 17. The director didn't understand the story either. Director Howard Hawks was known for being creative and confident, made incredible films. There's a funny secret about The Big Sleep. Hawks admitted that he didn't fully understand the plot himself. He read the script, he read the book, he talked to the screenwriter. Detective mystery was so complicated that even he got confused sometimes. He would be on set, filming a scene, and he'd stop and ask, "Wait, why does this character do this?" But he could give him a clear answer. So Hawks made a decision. Instead of trying to fix the confusing plot, he decided to focus on what he understood perfectly: the relationship between the two main characters and the action sequences. He made those parts so exciting and interesting that the confusing parts didn't matter as much. Tell the actors, don't worry about the mystery. Just make the scene feel real and dangerous. This sounds like a bad idea, but it actually worked perfectly. The movie became famous not for having a perfect story, but for having amazing characters and thrilling moments. Fox taught Hollywood a lesson that day. Sometimes, a great character is more important than a perfect plot. Looked confused, became genius. Number 16. William Faulkner wrote the script while also writing a novel. The screenwriter of The Big Sleep was William Faulkner, one of the greatest writers in American history. But here's the strange situation. While he was writing the screenplay for this movie, he was also writing another novel at the same time. His mind was split between two different stories in two different worlds. Sometimes he would write a brilliant line of dialogue for the movie and then immediately switch gears and write a page of his novel. His brain had to jump back and forth constantly, like switching between two different languages. This might sound chaotic, but Faulkner actually worked this way his whole life. He believed that jumping between different types of writing kept his mind fresh and creative. When he worked on just one thing for too long, his ideas would get tired. But by switching between the movie and the novel, both projects somehow became better. Dialogue in The Big Sleep has a special quality that feels different from other movies. The words sound like they came from a real writer, not just a screenwriter. That's because they did. It came from one of America's greatest authors. What looked divided was actually focused genius. Fact number 15. The studio almost cast different actors. Humphrey Bogart was chosen to play Detective Philip Marlowe. The studio considered other actors. Some people wanted a younger man in the role. Some wanted an actor who was more traditionally handsome. Some even suggested famous actors who were known for different types of characters. Producer Jack Warner made a bold choice. He decided that Bogart was the right person for this role, even though other studios might have disagreed. This was a risk. Bogart had played tough guys and criminals before, but he hadn't played a detective like this. Nobody knew if audiences would believe him as the hero of the story. Warner had faith. He believed that Bogart's tired eyes and rough voice were perfect for a man trying to solve a mysterious case. He was right. Bogart's performance became one of the greatest detective performances in all of cinema. Lauren Bacall was initially chosen by Hawks because he thought she had something special, even though she was completely unknown. Nobody had heard of her. She had barely acted before. But Hawks saw something in her that other directors missed. He saw strength. He saw intelligence. He saw talent. Both choices could have been disasters, but they turned out to be perfect decisions that changed movie history. What looked like a risk was actually perfect casting. Fact number 14. The cigarette smoking was completely real. In The Big Sleep, you'll notice that the characters smoke cigarettes constantly. Almost every scene, someone is smoking. This wasn't a special effect. This wasn't pretend. Actors actually smoked real cigarettes while filming almost every single take. Bogart smoked between takes, during takes, while delivering his lines. The smoke you see on screen is real smoke from real cigarettes. Nobody thought this was unusual or strange at the time. This was 1946. It was something everyone did. But from our perspective today, it's shocking how much smoking happens in this movie. Actors would take a drag from a cigarette in the middle of an important scene. Modern directors wouldn't ask them to. But back then, smoking was just a normal part of life that naturally appeared in movies. The smoke in these scenes creates a special atmosphere. It makes everything look more dangerous and mysterious. It makes the characters look tougher and cooler. So in a way, the cigarettes became part of the movie's style and feeling. They weren't just cigarettes, they were part of the character. What looked like real life was actually perfect filmmaking. Fact number 13. The censors tried to remove the kissing scenes. In 1946, movies had very strict rules about what could be shown on screen. People who controlled these rules were called censors. They decided what was appropriate and what was not. When they watched The Big Sleep, they became very upset about the kissing scenes between Bogart and Bacall. They said the kisses were too passionate. They said the characters were too flirty with each other. They said this kind of behavior wasn't appropriate for family audiences. Demanded that Howard Hawks remove several kissing scenes from the film, but Hawks refused. He fought with the censors, argued that the kisses were important to the story, explained that the chemistry between the characters was the heart of the entire movie. He stood his ground and didn't back down. Eventually, the censors gave in. They allowed most of the kissing scenes to stay. This was a big moment in cinema history. Directors had won a small battle against the censorship rules. They showed that artists had the right to show realistic human behavior on screen. Kissing scenes that the censors wanted to remove became some of the most famous moments in movie history. Decades later, people still talk about how romantic those scenes are. What looked like a rule was actually meant to be broken. Fact number 11. The director and star had arguments about the character. Humphrey Bogart and Howard Hawks didn't always agree on how the character of Philip Marlowe should act. Bogart wanted to play the detective as a man who was very confident and almost invincible. He wanted Marlowe to always have the right answer and always win every fight. Hawks wanted something different. Hawks wanted the character to be more human. He wanted Marlowe to make mistakes. He wanted Marlowe to sometimes not know what was happening. He wanted Marlowe to struggle. The two men argued about this on set. They would discuss scenes intensely. They would disagree about how lines should be delivered. They would challenge each other's ideas. But here's the beautiful part. Neither one of them got angry or mean, argued like two artists who both loved their work. They knew they disagreed because they both cared deeply. And slowly, Bogart started to understand Hawks's vision. Marlowe became less of a superhero and more of a real man trying to solve a mystery. This version of the character felt more interesting. It made the audience care about him more because he was flawed. He was human. In the end, Bogart's performance became one of his greatest roles, partly because Hawks pushed him to be better. What looked like conflict was actually collaboration and art. Fact number 10. The music was written to match emotions, not story. The composer who wrote the music for The Big Sleep was Max Steiner. He was one of the greatest film composers who ever lived. But when he watched the movie, he realized something interesting. He understood that the plot was confusing. He understood that even he couldn't follow it perfectly. So he made a decision. Instead of writing music that would explain the story or make the plot clearer, he decided to write music that would make the audience feel the right emotions. When Bogart and Bacall were together, Steiner wrote romantic, exciting music that made audiences fall in love with them. When there was danger or mystery, Steiner wrote music that was dark and scary. When the characters were confused, the music itself sounded confused. The music became like another character in the film. It guided the audience through the emotions, even when the plot was hard to follow. This was a brilliant solution to the problem. Steiner understood something deep about how movies work. He understood that people don't just want a perfect story, they want to feel something. They want music to make them brave, or scared, or romantic. The music in The Big Sleep does all of that perfectly. Even today, when you hear the theme from this movie, you immediately think of danger and mystery and romance. That's the power of music in film. What looked like a distraction was actually the heart of the film. Fact number 9. Humphrey Bogart's eyes were the secret weapon. Humphrey Bogart had eyes that told 1,000 stories without him saying a single word. In The Big Sleep, the camera spends a lot of time focused on his face, especially his eyes. Hawks understood that Bogart's eyes were his greatest acting tool. When Bogart looked at Lorne Bacall, his eyes showed everything he was feeling: attraction, confusion, fear, hope, all at the same time. When Bogart was confused about the plot, his eyes would show that confusion perfectly. When he was trying to be tough, his eyes would show that underneath the toughness, he was human and tired. Hawks would sometimes film entire scenes where Bogart barely says any words. He would just look and listen and react with his eyes. These moments are some of the most powerful in the movie. It's just one man's face and his eyes. And somehow, that's enough. This taught filmmakers an important lesson about cinema. A good actor doesn't need to talk a lot. A good actor can say everything with a look. Modern actors study Bogart's work to learn how to act with their eyes and face. Understand that sometimes silence is louder than words. What looked simple was actually complex artistry. Fact number 8. The props department made real guns look fake on purpose. The gunfights in The Big Sleep look incredibly real. The way the guns sound, the way they're handled, the way the bullets seem to hit things, it all feels genuine. But here's something strange. The props department actually spent extra time and money making the guns look slightly less realistic than real guns would look. They did this on purpose. Why? Because they discovered that when a gun looks too realistic on camera, something weird happens. The audience becomes uncomfortable. The violence feels too real. People want to close their eyes or look away. But when a gun looks just slightly less realistic, the audience can watch and enjoy the action without feeling too disturbed. It's a weird balance. The prop makers understood this balance perfectly. They created guns that looked amazing and felt dangerous, but not so dangerous that they disturbed audiences. This was another example of filmmakers understanding something deep about human psychology. They knew exactly how much realism the audience could handle. What looked realistic was actually carefully controlled artifice. Fact number 7. The Hollywood Actors Studio wanted to shut down the production. While The Big Sleep was being made, there was a big problem brewing in Hollywood. A group of actors created something called the Hollywood Actors Studio. This group wanted to change how studios treated actors. They wanted better pay, better working conditions, and more control over their roles. They were angry at the studio system. While Bogart was filming The Big Sleep, he was becoming more involved with this group. He was starting to question authority. He was starting to speak up about unfair treatment. The studio executives became worried. They didn't want their top star becoming a troublemaker. They didn't want him causing problems on set. Some people in the studio wanted to shut down production and replace Bogart with a more obedient actor. But Jack Warner, the head of the studio, made a bold decision. He decided that Bogart was too important to the movie. He decided to let Bogart do his work and also fight for his beliefs. This was an unusual decision for a studio head to make. Most studios would have fired the troublemaker. But Warner understood that Bogart was creating something important on screen. He understood that sometimes you have to trust your artists. So, the film continued. Bogart continued fighting for actors' rights. What looked like it might fall apart somehow held together. Number 6. The director used method acting before it was famous. Howard Hawks was using acting techniques in The Big Sleep that wouldn't become famous until many years later. He would push his actors to live like their character. He would have them stay in character between takes. He would create situations where the actors would feel real emotions while filming. This is called method acting, and it became very famous in the 1950s and 60s. But Hawks was doing it in 1946. He didn't call it method acting. He just called it good directing. He understood that actors give better performances when they're not just pretending, when they're actually feeling something real. So he would create scenarios on set that would make his actors genuinely worried or excited or confused. He would film them in those real moments. The performances are so powerful partly because the emotions the actors are showing are real emotions, not just fake acting. People would think they invented it. But Hawks was doing it years before anyone had even heard the term. What looked like natural acting was actually a carefully designed technique. Fact number 5. The film almost got a completely different ending. Before the final version of The Big Sleep was completed, there were discussions about completely changing the ending. Some studio executives wanted a different resolution. They wanted the detective to solve everything perfectly. They wanted all the mysteries to be explained. They wanted everything to make sense at the end. But Howard Hawks refused. He understood something important. He understood that the movie was never really about solving the mystery. It was about the journey. It was about watching a tough detective try to figure things out, about watching him interact with a strong woman. He decided to keep the ending the way it was, mysterious, incomplete, but somehow satisfying. The detective doesn't solve everything. Some questions don't get answered, but the audience doesn't care, because they've been taken on such an exciting ride that they don't need perfect resolution. This was a brave decision. It went against the studio's wishes, but Hawks stood firm, and it turned out he was right. The movie is more memorable because of its incomplete ending, not in spite of it. What looked like a flaw was actually the film's greatest strength. Fact number 4. Raymond Bacall's famous line was improvised. One of the most famous lines in The Big Sleep is when Raymond Bacall's character says to Bogart, "If you need me, just whistle." You know how to whistle, don't you? You just put your lips together and blow. This line became legendary. It's one of the most quoted lines in cinema history. People have written articles about how clever and flirty this line is. But here's the secret. Lauren Bacall came up with it on the spot. It wasn't in the script. She improvised it during filming. When asked later why she did this, she explained that the written dialogue didn't feel right. She wanted something that would feel more natural and more flirty. So she just said this line, and it worked perfectly. It was so perfect that nobody even realized she had made it up. Everyone assumed it was written that way. This shows something important about great acting. Great actors don't just follow instructions. Great actors improve the material. They make things better by adding their own creativity. Bacall's improvisation became one of the most iconic moments in film history. What looked like it was planned was actually created in the moment. Fact number 3. The studio system tried to control every aspect of the actor's life. In 1946, the big Hollywood studios didn't just control what happened on film. Sets. They tried to control the actors' real lives, too. The studios decided what actors could wear in public. They decided who they could be seen with. They even tried to control who they should fall in love with. When Bogart and Bacall started falling in love during filming, the studio executives became very interested. They wanted to manage the situation. They thought about whether this romance was good for the movie's publicity. They considered using it for marketing purposes. They discussed whether the relationship would hurt or help the film. Bogart and Bacall had to fight for the right to have a private love story. They had to push back against the studio's attempts to control their personal lives. Eventually, they won that fight. They got married and had a real marriage that lasted many years. But it took courage. It took them standing up to powerful people who wanted to control them. This was a moment when individual artists pushed back against a system that tried to control everything. Looked like a system with unlimited power was actually challenged by people who believed in freedom. Fact number 2. The critics didn't understand it at first. When The Big Sleep was first released in 1946, the professional critics didn't know what to make of it. Critics hated it. They said the plot was too confusing. They said it didn't make sense. They complained about the structure. They thought it was badly made. Some critics loved the chemistry between Bogart and Bacall, but they thought the detective story was a mess. The reviews were very mixed. Some were terrible. Some were wonderful. Almost nobody reviewed it as a perfect film. Almost nobody understood what Hawks was trying to do. The general audience, though, they understood perfectly. Regular people who went to see the movie loved it. They loved the characters. They loved the excitement. They loved the chemistry. They loved the feeling of the film, even if they couldn't explain the plot. Over time, the critics eventually came around. Years later, they started to understand that Hawks had done something special. They realized that the movie wasn't broken, it was just different. It was breaking the rules on purpose. Today, The Big Sleep is considered a masterpiece. The same critics who complained about it in 1946 now praise it. What looked like failure was actually ahead of its time. Fact number 1. The movie changed Hollywood forever. The Big Sleep didn't just become a great film. It changed how movies were made in Hollywood forever. After this movie came out, directors realized they could break some of the old rules and still make great films. They realized that perfect plots weren't always necessary. They realized that chemistry between actors mattered more than some other things. They realized that style and feeling could be as important as story. They realized that mystery and confusion could actually be interesting to audiences. The film also changed what it meant to be a film detective. Before The Big Sleep, movie detectives were usually perfect heroes who solved everything. After The Big Sleep, detectives could be flawed. They could be confused. They could be real people trying to figure things out. This changed detective films forever. Every detective movie that came after was influenced by what Bogart did in this film. The film also showed the world that Humphrey Bogart was capable of being not just a tough guy, but a complete actor who could do anything. He became one of the greatest film actors of all time, partly because of this role. It showed the world that Lauren Bacall was a star, even though nobody had heard of her before. She became one of Hollywood's greatest actresses, partly because of this film. Most importantly, The Big Sleep showed that movies don't have to be perfect to be perfect. What looked like it might be forgotten became one of the most important films ever made. Bonus fact: the lost script pages and the original ending. There's a mystery that still haunts film historians today. Shortly after The Big Sleep was completed, several pages of the original script disappeared. These weren't just any pages, they were pages that reportedly contained the explanation for what happened to Sean Regan, the character whose fate nobody ever explained in the film. Some people believe that William Faulkner wrote the answer, and then it got lost. Some people believe the pages were deliberately removed. Some people believe they were hidden in the studio archives somewhere. Film historians have looked for these pages for decades. They've searched through the Warner Brothers archives. They've looked in private collections. They've contacted people who worked on the film. But nobody has ever found these missing pages. Or if they have, they've never told anyone about it. The mystery has become part of Hollywood legend. There are theories about what was on those pages. Some people think the pages would explain the entire plot in ways that would make everything clear. Some people think the pages were boring and didn't matter. Some people think they're hidden in a vault somewhere, waiting to be discovered. The truth is, nobody really knows. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the mystery of what happened to those script pages perfectly matches the mystery of the movie itself. The film was made incomplete, and the evidence of that incompleteness also disappeared. It's like the film is haunted by its own missing pieces. Old tools, new mystery. The Big Sleep is more than just a detective movie. It's a story about how the best things sometimes happen when people work together, even when they don't fully understand what they're doing. It's a story about two people who fell in love while pretending to fall in love. It's a story about a director who broke the rules and made something beautiful. It's a story about how mistakes can become masterpieces. This film teaches us that life doesn't have to make perfect sense to be meaningful. Sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones where you don't understand where you're going. Sometimes the best relationships are the ones that surprise you. Sometimes the best art is created when artists trust each other and take risks together. Humphrey Bogart taught us that a man can be tough and vulnerable at the same time. Raymond Bacall taught us that a woman can be strong and beautiful and funny all at once. Howard Hawks taught us that a director can be brave enough to admit when something doesn't make sense and still create something wonderful. Every single person who worked on this film, from the largest star to the smallest crew member, contributed something to this masterpiece. They all took a chance. They all trusted something bigger than themselves. If you enjoyed these stories about The Big Sleep, please subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them one story at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the magic of cinema.